Sarah Wheeler, editor-in-chief of Housing Wire. You and I don't know each other very well. We got introduced recently. I know who you are. I know Housing Wire. Certainly a lot of respect for the information you guys put out, for the industry as a whole, for sure, the financial services and mortgage banking that we both support. But I'm excited to talk to you for a number of reasons. And one is just love to pick your brain on getting the pulse of what you're feeling across the industry right now. You've been with Housing Wire now, how long?
I've been here 7.5 years. Yeah.
And was that your introduction to the industry then?
Yes. So my background was in healthcare and advertising for different brands, some technical brands, but yes, this was my first foray into mortgage finance.
So now you've been doing it long enough to have seen some real cycles, some real ebbs and flows, and various forms of discourse, so to speak, and friendly competition, and what is Fannie and Freddie going to do, and which we're dealing with right now. What all of those things. So one of the reasons I'm excited to talk about the industry, but I'm also just excited to talk about journalism and media in general, because I am a little bit enamored with the way that the perception of media, quote unquote, has changed over time. And I think getting to know you a little bit and knowing that you went to school studying journalism, that's clearly something you wanted to do a long time ago, and how things have changed. But maybe back us up a little bit. When you were in high school, what made you say, I want to be a journalist?
Yeah, I just have always been super interested in politics and in what's happening and policy kind of things, even at that age. And I love to write. And I was a huge reader of newspapers at that time, like physical newspapers, because I'm old. So, we had a couple come to the house. And then one of my very favorite jobs when I was in college, I was in journalism. I got to work on Capitol Hill, and I worked for a political action committee, where at the time I got a briefing book every week of all of the newspaper articles from around the world that had been published on that topic. So this is pre-internet. This is like a Google search in a paper form.
Right.
And it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so you could just deep dive into this topic, and that's what I was writing on. So it was pretty interesting.
Do you thinking about that for a second, do you think that the way that information is now distributed is better or worse? I mean, back then you had this book, right? You had this manual that you had to read, but you said you loved it. I'm sure some people didn't love having to parse through all of that, versus today, things were fed maybe differently and maybe in caption form almost. I'm curious your take on whether that's a bad thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that what people have noted over having that physical newspapers, as you're flipping through, you're seeing a whole lot of things that are just there. You didn't pick them, and you might be like, oh, here I'm learning about something completely new. Oh, and here's this whole other thing, as opposed to I'm picking the news I want to see, and then I'm being fed the news I want to see based on the algorithm of what I've already seen. You do get that echo chamber, and you just don't get that in a print product of yesteryear. So I do miss that part of it, but obviously from just a volume standpoint, this is much better.
Is it frustrating for you at some level? And forget mortgage banking for just a second. I'm just saying as a pure journalist, is it frustrating for you to have seen that shift from, to get your news, you kind of have to do a little bit, you have to read deeper, you have to do some research, versus absolutely, to your point, if I've decided what I want to see, I can just go see that. Is that frustrating to you at some level?
I guess I don't see it as frustrating, but it's the reason that I feel like it's sort of like streaming services now. Now you have to have like 4 streaming services to see all the different things you want to do. And so now I just have a lot of different home pages that, a site like The Atlantic, for instance, I read daily, things like that. And so I'm looking through. So in that sense, it's sort of like the front page of a newspaper, because you do see all the things that they have, but it takes longer, right? And I don't know how many people do that. How many people are looking at 8 and 10 news sites a day? Probably not as many as much as me.
No, and I think most people would say, if you live in your brain in a place where you actually want the information delivered, and then I'll decide what I do with that information. Meaning, I don't really need to tell you. I'm not looking for a commentary. I'm not looking for an opinion. I don't want to think that I'm being connected to something that has an agenda. I just want to know what actually happened. for people like me, maybe if I'm that kind of person, which I am, but you can trust me or not, where do I go? I don't know where to go. So that's then the challenge, is that it takes a lot of research to say, okay, I'm going to stick on this site for 2 or 3 months, and then I'm going to decide whether or not I'm being fed the news or if I'm being fed a commentary. And that's exhausting.
Yeah. Well, and I think the vast majority, I mean, they've shown of Americans get their news from social media. And so, and we know that social media will reinforce the things that you already have, I mean, they're trying to serve you the content you want. So that to me is disturbing. And I don't know how you counter that. I know right now, there's lots of deep discussions about how you counter that, but wow, that's so scary to me. I love social for some reasons, but as a way to get all your news, that seems like a sketchy deal.
No, it is, and I'll tell you, just being honest, it's where I get most of my news. But what I've done is I've decided that Twitter, for me, as an example, is not a place where I want any entertainment. I want to figure out, okay, I trust Sarah when it comes to certain things, so I'm just going to follow Sarah, and she'll tell me what to read. Or I trust such and such when it comes to weather. I trust such and such when it comes to the news or politics. But I think that's still dangerous, right? Because when I'm on there scrolling around, Twitter's giving me some ideas on where they think I might want to go, right?
That's true. But, it's funny you say Twitter, because I think a lot of Twitter is journalists. I'm on Twitter. That's my favorite. And I follow a lot of journalists. And so that's how, I can see some things come up. But to your point, it really is. I do think you can see now too, with social, people follow people. And news has become very personal in the sense of like, I trust this person at this place, as opposed to like, oh, the New York Times. It's like, no, maybe it's this particular writer at the New York Times, or maybe it's this particular writer at the Atlantic, or whatever it is. And that's a very big change, say from, when I started in the business, so many years ago, where it was really like the publication was the thing that people would go to. And now it's all very personal.
What a great point. I mean, because then that's dangerous. That can both be a really good thing, but it can be a really dangerous thing. If someone is attracted to someone for some reason, whether it's the way that they communicate, the way that they dress, the town that they seem to have come from, which seems kind of similar to the town that I came from, maybe, that I bolt onto that person, but then I start to maybe be more swayed towards their ideas or their ideals that may actually not line up with mine. That's interesting. I guess that's also you coming from a place where you were more, studying on the print journalism side versus
Yes, that's correct.
The newsroom that I'm watching on television, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was actually, I majored in print journalism, which I'm not even sure you can do that anymore.
Is that for real, or are you just making fun?
No, I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure there's a specialty.
Well, because there's
for that.
not. Yeah, that's. They ought to bring that back, though, more from a blocking and tackling perspective on where to start. I hear what you're saying. There's probably not a place for that anymore, because where are they going to get a job, right?
Right.
But that's interesting. That changes the dynamic, though, and where we start and how we then deliver the news.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think part of that concentration was really on the production side, because it was print. And so we learned everything, I literally did cut and paste where you were like cutting and pasting.
Wow, real
yeah. So way a long time ago. So I can see we obviously don't need that so much, but I do think that there is a different flow. And even in newsrooms, you see it now, like, is there a fact checker? We don't have a separate fact checker. I am the fact checker. I'm, and that's why it's super important that I hire people that I trust, and that we do a really thorough view of, like, if they're doing anonymous sources, I know who those sources are. They've shown me how they got there, whatever. Like, there's just layers upon layers here. And I think that the hard thing when journalism is so people-based, like, say, oh, follow my Substack, or here I am on Medium, it's like, where is the intermediary level of editing? And I know that, you can say that editors are, that's largely been cut out, but I think that that's a big danger, because we've seen people have made things up, people haven't gotten it right. And the more eyes on it, the better, I think.
How careful do you have to be at that stage of the process where the person that's doing the fact checking isn't either knowingly or unknowingly swayed in one direction or the other? Because I would assume that a fact checker then needs another fact check. They need a Sarah Wheeler sitting on top of them to fact check the fact check. I mean, you said people follow people and humans are humans. So
right.
I would guess that happens sometimes.
I think for us, we really, we get a lot of that out. We have a daily stand up where we're like, here's what we're going to cover. And so in that meeting is when we talk about angles and when we talk about who you're going to contact and things like that. So I feel like it's at that high level that we can see if someone's already coming at it from a place where you're like, you don't have the right mind frame on this. I think it's a lot to do with hiring a lot of different kinds of people. Mm-hmm. I think diversity is absolutely in every way diverse. Locations, the kinds of schools you went to, the kind of background you have, your race, your ethnicity, everything. We need as much diversity as possible.
No, that's such a great point. And you mean, and which then leads us to thought diversity, right? So right. We're sort of checking each other along the way. Is that when the room gets together, is that a daily thing that happens?
Yeah, that's a daily thing. When we decide that here's what we're going to cover for the day, it's our daily stand up. The writers come with things that they want to pitch, that they want to write. But then we also, as editors, we have things that we already know they're going to, we want you to cover these things. And then there's, generally, we're going to do mortgage apps on this day. We're going to do mortgage rates on this day. Mm-hmm. But for those larger stories, that's where we talk about, okay, well, who are your sources going to be? Let's all get together here. And of course we have a source list and things like that. So.
What is it like inside of a publication like this when you have a source that you've been working with for a while, and maybe that source is a leader in the industry, right? But then you write something totally honestly that maybe puts that source or that source's company in a potentially negative light, or how is that dynamic then managed?
It's tough, because we're people too, right? And a lot of these people, our advertisers, our readers, in some instances, our readers are our sources, so we just do the best we can. And I think the relationships that I find most valuable here are people, especially comms people, who are like, hey, I know you had to write this story. I appreciate that, but I appreciate that you reached out for our take on it. So we really just try to approach every story as if like we're doing right by everybody involved in that. And sometimes, they know if you have an independent newsroom, I have to report on the bad, just like the good. Otherwise there's no value to my readers, Yeah. But at the same time, I'm not out to get anyone. We're not out to smear anybody. We don't have a dog in this fight, which, there are different sides and they all think that we do. And it's like, no, really, we really don't. We're not in the space. We're just reporting on the space. But I think it's really helpful to have those personal relationships so that person knows I'm not out to get you.
Yeah.
And your best bet is to answer me back when I say, hey, we've got this story we're thinking of running, do you want to comment?
Right.
So.
Right. It does, and I don't recall, you'll have to remind me, on Housing Wire's site or on the publication itself, are there mortgage companies that sponsor the publication? Is there advertising? I'm sure there's advertising dollars.
So I would say most of our advertising comes from financial, fintech companies. So solution providers who want to reach the audience that we have, which our audience is mortgage lenders, servicers, real estate people. So it's the solution providers who want to talk to our audience most of all, but certainly different newsletters are sponsored by different, or podcasts might be sponsored by different mortgage lenders. So,
and in those situations, there's probably times, right, where an article is written. I mean, technology has been the buzzword now for a couple of years, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. Technology, as it relates to the industry, as it relates to efficiencies, as it relates to reaching the customer, all of those things. Just out of curiosity, how is the dynamic when you have someone who is an advertiser that then says, hey, you wrote this article about my competition. I guess you have to have conversations with them that, hey, we appreciate the advertising, but we're keeping our heads in one place, like it or not.
What I really love is that at Housing Wire, there's there's a strong line between ad and editorial. I'm the only one who maybe has on both sides, but our ad team is really good about telling people, listen, this is great and we'll do this, And you can send me your press release, but if it's not newsworthy, they're not going to cover it. And there's never a conversation. So at the reporter level, at the writer level, they don't get any of that noise. And they're really making decisions based on like, hey, is this really something we should talk about? And then we really try to have a large source, a large range of sources, because there are tons of innovation happening. There's tons of great things. So talk to a bunch of companies.
Right.
But yeah, they don't, I mean, I guarantee you our reporters don't know, oh, this is our biggest advertiser. They could find out, but they don't care. So, and then that's the way I want it.
As you moved up the ladder in the industry, was that one of the things that was hard to learn, how to deal with that emotion between advertiser who also could potentially be someone inside of one of your articles that maybe gets bent out of shape about something, and then how it also impacts the staff there at the company?
Yeah, I think so. I actually joined Housing Wire as their content solutions editor. So my whole job was to write those stories. And the
Okay.
reason they hired me was because they didn't want to have their reporters doing that, the news reporters. So I was sort of in that ad space, right? So that's how I started out. And I think that the great thing about that is that I know a lot about the tech companies in our space. And I think that helps me. I think that helps our whole brand because I understand the innovation. I mean, I've written white papers for I don't know how many of our advertisers at this point. And yet I can still, there's a managing editor of the newsroom, and he's the one that decides ultimately if things go. So I have that overall view, but he's making those calls.
Got it. So you spent time in DC,
Yeah,
correct? Okay. Do you miss that?
I
You
do.
kind
I
of do
love
spend, you
DC.
sort of do spend still a little bit of time in DC with doing
I
this.
do, but if I could move there and be based there, I would absolutely love it because to me it's just like the center of the universe. It's what's going on. I know people feel that way about New York City or San Francisco if they're Silicon Valley, but for me it is DC. So I absolutely loved it.
Do you miss the being so closely tied to politics?
Yeah, although I would say there's so much policy. Like this week, we had the CFPB come out with two things. We're about to run a contributor piece from some people from HUD. We've had, I mean, it's all through our industry, as
Right.
it is every industry. But I think now more than ever. So when I joined, it was in the Obama administration,
Mhm.
and regulation. It was right around the Dodd-Frank time. So our coverage was dominated by compliance and Dodd-Frank and regulations and all that. And then, then we really got into an area of really innovation, and regulatory was more quiet. It didn't go away. It was more quiet. Well, it has roared back like a lion
Yep.
the last 2 months. And so I get my political fix all the time.
Well, I bet you
Because,
do now. I mean, even some of the back and forth I'm seeing on LinkedIn right now, which usually leaves some of that stuff out,
yeah.
is is I see people coming out that I haven't heard from in a couple of years, and they're all over what's happening at the regulatory level, as they should be. But I guess that for you personally, that gets your juices flowing a little bit.
It does. And in the intervening years, when I had a young family, my husband at the time, we started a small business, a home health agency.
Mhm.
And so really I also have that, so we had, 75 people on staff, and we had to make payroll, and we worked with Medicare. And so I have some of that background. So I tend to understand how small business owners feel when it comes
Right.
to regulation. And so regulation to me is the regulatory part is just super important, because I know if you're running a business, every single thing they decide has an impact on you and on your bottom line. And with Medicare, Congress every year decides how much they're going to pay out, and our bottom line would change stroke of a pen.
Right.
And so I'm very attuned to regulation, and I at least I think I understand what some people in the industry feel about it, and it's totally necessary. Just like in the healthcare world, you had people who were doing terrible things, Medicare fraud, and those should definitely be caught. We know that there are bad actors in mortgage. There's bad actors everywhere. So it's not that I don't think you should have regulation, but I'm very attuned to like, this could be a big deal for people.
When you made the move from politics and then into mortgage banking, Was that a difficult move from, I mean, look, you're clearly a super smart person, but was that a difficult move to learn this new industry? Or is that not even the way that it works when you have the brain of a journalist? Meaning I can get into almost anything because I know the questions to ask and I'll learn as I go, kind of thing. I'm curious that dynamic when you made that shift into the industry.
I think it's a shift that's difficult, and we see that with our new writers. So if you are a person who's in the mortgage industry, almost never are you going to go into journalism about the mortgage industry. You are making a ton of money. You have a whole different trajectory in your path. And it's really a different mindset. Most of the people we hire for journalists, I mean, there's an altruistic mindset there that is not so, it's just a different mindset is what I would say. And so we're taking people who oftentimes have no experience, just like I didn't in this space. But again, you're looking for an agile mind, somebody who can learn it and apply what they've known in other industries to that. And so actually, I wish that more journalists would take business classes, take finance classes. It would be so helpful for them. It would have been helpful for me. I should have done that.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I'm curious about that also. So in your educational experience, were there discussions? Were there like ethical discussions? Like these are the things you can attempt to stay. Talk to me about that. Like I have somebody that never took a journalism class. I took writing classes. I took English classes. I took literature. I mean, there were things like that, but not to be a journalist. Talk to me a little bit about the things that aren't specifically about writing, but maybe are about ethics or relationship building. Where are there lines that shouldn't be crossed? Give me your take on some of that.
Yeah, and you have the ivory tower view of that, and then you have the like, I know this person, I like this person, and then I'm about to write bad things about their company, like we just talked about. So when you get into that, it's just hard as a person. But we did actually absolutely have ethics classes about what that looks like. I think so much of it now. Some of those things stay the same, but I think one of the most pernicious things now, and the reason that we don't use any freelancers for news content, is I have no idea who's paying them on the other end. I have no idea what their affiliations are. So either you work for me full time and I know that I'm the one paying you, and so you're not being paid by, oh, you're doing this story on this one lender, and you just happen to bring up this one fintech solution provider. Meanwhile, you've gotten paid by them to do that. I don't know that, right? So you either work for me or you work on our sponsor content, and we outsource some of those things, but I don't outsource news stories for that reason. And when I was coming up, I mean, you'd have to actually meet someone in person to do that, right? I mean, when I started freelancing before the internet, I had to send out a mail thing and say, hey, I'm pitching through the mail. And then they would send me back, yeah, I think you should do that. This is for a magazine. And then I'd send them, all through the mail. So imagine how much harder that is. And how are you really going to influence people and be like, hey, whereas now, everyone, they could be on the payroll of, and we saw that a couple of years ago where some of the major publications found out that their people were being paid by other people, and that's why they were sourcing them. So I think the ethical dilemmas in some ways are the same, but they've multiplied in how they have to be applied. That's what I would say.
When you bring up a good point too, because in the last year, you're not getting face-to-face with any of these people. I mean, we're back to doing it via email, which is a whole lot faster than sending a letter. Which, boy, that got my brain thinking in a lot of different directions. Like if I'm a freelance writer and I'm having to send letters the way that you just described, well, then the only way, human nature is that at some level I'm motivated by some money. I got to pay the bills. I got to, that my pipeline of activity has to be so big at that point, because I'm waiting for these things to come back, that potentially maybe then, or at least has the potential to dilute the value that I'm creating on paper, because I'm increasing my pipeline so much, where now maybe that's been eliminated at least a little bit. But I appreciate, what you're saying, because my experience with journalists outside of ones that may ask me for a quote or some interview is watching television. Right. It's watching, what was the name of that show? Kevin Spacey was the president. Come on.
No idea.
Do you know what I'm talking about? If my wife says,
I do. It's but don't ask me for the name of it.
Mara was the journalist and doing backdoor deals and things like that. And so that's what you have in your brain. Like I see
House of Cards.
House of Cards. That's
House
it.
of Cards. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Thomas Sealbinder, the voice from the other side of the room. House of Cards. Yeah, and so I'm being dramatic, right? But in that environment, you're seeing the underbelly, right, of journalism. I'll write this about you if you give this to me. You give me an extra interview with this other person. I'll write something nice about you. And I bet you saw some of that. Maybe not at that level, but you saw some of that coming up, I would think.
Yeah, well, I get pitched. I don't even know how many pitches I get a day from people I don't know, and there has to be a connection there. I have to know, like, somebody has to recommend you, and then I'll go back and see, and then I'll talk to the people that you've worked with, but I mean, we just don't take on a lot of freelancers. The freelancers that we have are people we've known for years. And they're very upfront about, hey, here's who else I'm working for. Here's who else. Here's my thing. So it's funny. We just covered, we're covering a story where this has happened in the mortgage industry because they've hired so many people, underwriters specifically, sight unseen. People had made up entire resumes, backgrounds, and got hired in and absolutely did not know what they were doing. Thought they could fake it. And I mean, journalism's important, but like home loans are really important. I mean, that's a terrible thing that they were doing that. So I think it could happen anywhere. Sure. But we're on, I think how you do that is you hire people. You have a fully staffed newsroom.
Well, it's also experience, right? I mean, you probably couldn't have made those same decisions 20 years ago. You weren't ready. Like you didn't have the experience to learn from either your own mistakes or seeing other people make mistakes that you knew you didn't want to replicate. And yes, I confirm what you just said about underwriters. So we have our technology platform supports mortgage bankers in their growth. And so we've seen some of that where there are these resumes that get accepted, someone gets hired, and then they're off the job a week later, but they got paid a sign-on bonus. And now you're chasing down sign-on bonuses. And these people aren't going to pay you back. Criminals to begin with. And I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never heard of anything like, I've heard originators make up stuff, right? But now there's, everybody has access to public record and documentation. You can do some level of confirming and vetting at that level, but yeah, you go hire an underwriter. How did you know to make up that resume? And how did you know to answer the questions or the test that you were provided so that you actually got hired? So no, you give people enough rope, some people, they're going to take a lot of it.
I agree. Well, and then, we've seen that some of those people are actually criminals and they're just in it for the personal information they can get. It's crazy. So
even worse,
human nature never changes. It just develops. It just has more opportunities for good and for bad.
So you need the checks and balances. You need some regulatory environment. You need to hire the right people and have the right staff around you that you ultimately trust. And then you got to stick to that blocking and tackling. I'm sure there's moments where you get offered something, a story or access to something, and you smell a fish, kind of, right? And you got to be confident enough and experienced enough to know when to say no to something that might feel like breaking news.
Oh, absolutely. No, we had, when the last director, when Richard Cordray was in the CFPB, I don't think I've ever told this story before, but we had a source that we really, really trusted that, great person. And they said, hey, I just saw him. That's when he was still there, but we knew he was going to be fired at any moment or whatever. And they're like, he just packed his stuff and walked out. And that would have been a huge breaking story, but we're like, okay, well, until we can corroborate that with a second person, we are not writing that story. But of course you want to break it. You want to be the person. It was like a month later that actually happened. So I don't know what they saw, and it's really not on them, but it's on us. Right now we have a story where we have 5 background sources, but no primary source. And so we're not running it. It's not to do with the CFPB. It's a lender. And so, we're careful, and people don't understand, sometimes they get really mad about what we publish. And it's like, we actually have pretty high standards. You just don't know it because there's all this stuff we haven't published that we totally could have, but we don't want to do that. We're in this for the long game. We're in this for our reputation. And until we know for sure, even if that means we're going to be second, we're going to be right. So that's my focus.
How hard is that, what you just described, for the younger journalist that this is my opportunity to make a name for myself? Yep. But you're the experienced one that's saying, hey, pump the brakes. How difficult is that?
I think it is. And that's why it's great to have some senior journalists. So, James Clement came on from The Real Deal about 6 months ago. And so he's the one that has all these sources. And so I think when it gets, when he's feeling that pressure, he's like, okay, so I have this primary, I don't have a primary, I should hold it. I'm like, yep, you should hold it. He's like, okay. And he's going to hold it. It's just, you need someone else to be like, yeah, no, you can't do it yet. Yes, you're doing the right thing. And it's just great to have that kind of back and forth. And we have, several senior editors that I feel that I trust like that. So and then we just wouldn't publish it for the younger ones who want to jump on it. And it's a great learning experience to them to show them, look, we have 5 people and 3 of these people are people that are totally good to go, but still you got to be right more than you got to be fast.
Yeah. What a great quote. And then as a reader, I won't lie, I get enamored by the breaking news, right?
Sure.
But I do know that I then will go to other places, and I'm not talking about the mortgage industry, I'm talking about in general. I'll go to other places afterwards to see what they're reporting. And that's probably my check and balance of, I don't really know who this outlet is, and that's kind of fun or cool or horrible what they just broke. But let me go over here and see what they're saying about it. And I think that you're the place that I would go to. Let me go over here and see what Sarah's.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
See what Housing Wire is saying about it. And that's also where you're going to get the whole story, not just the headline that you then get to build out the story yourself.
Well, and the truth is, now, especially as we have a lot of mortgage companies going public, what we write about them can literally move markets in a bad way, right? We are very careful about that. And we also know that there are people who want to influence what we write from all sides, from every side, that will feed us stuff that's not true, that's just outright lies. And so, we just have to be really careful. And I think that has escalated in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. It's not anyone in particular. I just think it's a very competitive space. And now you have just a range of people, and not even necessarily with those companies, but we get the most ridiculous things. And if we weren't scrupulous about it, we could, we're not going to print rumors. We don't want to print rumors. That's not who we are. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I want to ask you a couple of other questions before we break. What are some of the things that your readers are either reading most about right now, or that you see on the horizon, like from the mortgage contacts, technology originators, retail wholesale correspondent across the board that you're communicating with? I'm curious, what do you feel like is the thing that they're most concerned about, number one? And then what is also maybe some of the things that you feel like they're most excited about on a go-forward basis?
I think those two things are intertwined, because I do feel like having not just a very active regulatory thing, but just an active legislation thing. So our biggest story in the last 3 months, maybe even the last 4 months, has been Biden's first-time home buyer tax credit across the board. Everyone wants to know about it for different reasons, right? And so anything we write about that has just been viral. Because you have the consumer angle, but then you have people who are like, oh, I could get this buyer now would qualify for that. Then you have a lot of people going, this is a terrible idea because we already have huge demand. Why do we want to pour gasoline on demand now? Let's wait till mortgage rates cool off and then do that. So I think a lot of the things coming down from the stimulus package and how that's going to influence housing. Just this week, we're trying to digest the infrastructure bill with $213 billion worth of housing things and what that looks like. And there's all sorts of things in there. All sorts of things in there. So I think people are very much looking for that explanation. And then from our perspective, our angle is, how does it impact your business? Yeah. So it's not just this, but like, okay, what does that mean for you sitting there, LO? What does that mean? Low inventory has been huge. How hard it is to build, that's been huge. So I think those things, people are excited. They want more inventory to come online. So they're always looking for those stories. The hot housing markets are interesting, but also kind of discouraging. We know that real estate agents absolutely have worked so hard this year, many of them. And, you're getting beat out by 20. We actually heard last night on a Clubhouse, 70 people were bidding on one house. So just, if you're 69 of those real estate agents worked on an offer and it might have been their 20th offer that they've gotten beat out on. Meanwhile, they're not getting paid anything for this. So, so I think there's a lot of movement right now that people are really interested in from a federal level.
Do you mentioned something that I wanted to ask about. You mentioned the loan officer, like what's moving the markets for the loan officer. How is this going to impact the business of the loan officer? Is that really where you start when you think about what it is you're writing about? Does it start with the loan officer, or is it really more homogenized across, executives and owners, compliance departments, and it could still start with the loan officer, right? But I'm curious, is there a foundation that says what we do starts with creating value from a news perspective for the loan officer?
It's a great question. And really how we handle that is through beats. So I have certain people who are focused on the loan officer angle. And then I have certain people who are focused on the executive level. And then I have certain people who are, their beat is really that federal beat, but trying to get it down to either the owner of a business or the person sitting there on the line. So I don't know that we can start with one thing because we cover so much, but we always do want to think about that person and go, how are they getting this information? And we have newsletters that are broken out. Like we have a newsletter just for loan officers. We have one for real estate agents. We have one for people in title and settlement. We're about to launch one for valuation. So the editors of those, they're writing ed notes for those people. They're on the phone with 8 to 10 of those people in that industry every single week to go, what are they interested in? What are they hearing? What are they worried about? And so they're the ones who are then writing stories to that audience that they're talking to.
Right, okay.
So it kind of takes care of itself that way.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so maybe last question. I always say last question, and then knowing me, it could lead off into 5 other things. Not industry related. I have a 18-year-old who wants to be in film, and not, unlike most 18-year-olds, he's not talking about being in front of the camera. He wants to write, he wants to direct, he wants to be the creative brain, the one that has the idea and brings it to market. And part of that is that he's been doing some journalism. He's been writing for the local college newspaper. He's not in college, but he takes a couple college classes.
That's awesome.
And it's fun listening to him talk about an idea and how he wants to get this idea on paper. And then it leads to us having discussions around, quote, the media, just, which is this blanket term that I don't know where it started, where,
right.
It's the media said this, or who's the media? From the time that you started to today, talk a little bit about that perception of the media, because it's something that actually personally concerns me a little bit. Like I look at and I guess I'm old enough, right? Like I look at the media or trusted journalists, outlets, as a way to create checks and balances, as a way to help find the things that are broken so that it creates noise and commentary around, hey, this thing is broken and we need to come up with a solution, or put pressure on the people that can go create the solution. It was a check and a balance for me. It doesn't mean that everyone's great. I still view it that way. It doesn't mean there's not bad actors, but the perception of the media isn't really there anymore. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences from when you started to today around that perception of the media.
I think it goes back to that media being a big corporation. And in some ways that's gotten much worse because you've seen hedge funds buy up a bunch of local markets and then just strip it out. And then, close it down, not, people leave, they don't, and pretty soon there's not a local market newspaper or media outlet. So in that way, I think I might be pessimistic as well. If you think about corporate, not that we didn't have corporate ownership, not that you didn't have giant corporations owning newspapers, but you had a really solid local, like this person's running the newspaper because that's their passion and their life's goal, and it's harder and harder for those people to find jobs. Like who's paying those people? And you still see, I think, really individual actors who have broken some of the biggest stories. I think about the Flint water crisis was broken by an independent journalist who then, and I think about, the BBC and AP and some of these that are still putting their money where their mouth is and really paying money for those harder stories. But I think it's going to be personal. I think it's going to continue to be personal with all the good and the bad that is that we just talked about, right? It's less about the institution, but at the heart of it, and then what I would tell your son or anyone who wanted to get into it is like, this is about people. The stories are always about people. Even when I'm writing a technical story about a technical thing, if there's not a human emotional angle to that, it's just, you might as well be looking at a technical manual. And it doesn't, mortgage finance, or even worse, not worse, but even more technical, technology solutions for part of the mortgage process. How do you make that interesting? But we try and we strive, because at the end, you're a person, I'm a person, you're writing for people and stories. I mean, the one thing I would say is it is a better time to be a storyteller now than ever in the history of the world. You have more media, you have more formats and ways to get it out. But as far as media, the big corporations, I mean, it is kind of tough.
Well, it's a great time to be a storyteller. The problem is I don't know the difference between a storyteller and a truth teller. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's
Great
what
point.
that's what we have to sift through a little
Yep.
bit. Okay, final statement just for fun. You were mentioning earlier, and I totally agree, that if you've got to be careful when you post stories, to make sure it's as accurate as possible. You can trust your sources, and also know that mistakes can move markets.
Right.
Or really, an article, even if it's not a mistake, if it's accurate, it moves markets. Wouldn't it be just kind of fun, though, to play Elon Musk for a moment and just make an article that says, mortgage lending to accept cryptocurrency, and just see what happens?
Please do that. That would be great.
As Thomas Sealbinder, my partner in crime, who was an early crypto investor, just said, please do that.
We will work on it. I did have one of our contributors want to do an April Fool's story yesterday that I was just like, no, I am not doing that. No, and no.
Hey, that would have been a good one, right? Crypto
It would
to be
have.
accepted.
That would have been good. Chipotle, I still right now, I haven't checked it. Pretty sure they did that with a little game where you could guess a 6-digit code and you could get either free burritos or free Bitcoin. And I'm pretty sure there was no real code. I'm pretty sure it's just, you're just typing away
And just
Oh, that is hilarious.
I had to remind myself, right, that like, see, a lot of people, like, I think as you get older, especially, you forget about April Fool's Day. I don't wake up in the morning and go,
yesterday. Yep.
oh, look, it's April Fool's Day, I better be careful today, right? You're just reading,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden you're like, this is wild. I can't believe it.
By the way, so much of our news is wild anyway, and then it's sort of somewhat believable.
Well, that's true. That's true too, right? April Fool's Day is like almost every day nowadays. But then it clicks, right? You're like, oh, wait a minute. Today's April Fool's Day, right? But you may have made a decision in that first like 15 minutes of reading something that is not good.
Yeah, no. Well, and that's a whole nother topic that maybe we could talk about some other time, Sarah, which is the stories that do manipulate markets and manipulate decisions, but the stories weren't accurate. And now you have a group of people that have really messed things up for themselves by following that story, maybe making a bad investment or pulling out of something that was for wrong reasons. But anyway, I know you're not going to play. And I say Elon Musk. I mean, Elon actually put his money where his mouth is, so he actually really did invest. But I think sometimes I wonder, does Elon just wake up in the morning and think, hey, I'm going to post this and see who decides to go make this huge investment or go pull out of whatever? And
yes, absolutely.
The answer is yes. Yeah. Sarah Wheeler, thank you so much for coming on The Walk. I hope you'll come back again. Maybe we'll have like a red alert if there's a story that I'd love to just pick your brain on. And if it's too raw, you can tell me no. If it's not, then we can talk about it. And I hope to meet you in person as things open up at a conference or a Housing Wire event. But most that are in the industry that check this out, know who Housing Wire is. I hope they now feel even more comfortable with the person kind of pulling the strings and running the show. And you've been a pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on The Walk, Sarah.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I'd come back anytime. You just let me know.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.